Some nights the world feels a little too bright, even after the lamps are turned off. Thoughts still glow behind the eyes. The day keeps replaying itself like a hallway where the lights refuse to dim. If you're listening tonight with that restlessness, busy mind, tired body, let's step somewhere quieter together. Imagine a museum after hours, not the grand gallery with footsteps and murmurs, but the storage rooms behind the public doors, a place where silence is not emptiness but care. The air is cooler than the corridor outside, cool in the way stone holds the memory of shade. Light is directed, never generous, only enough to show you what you need and no more. There is a faint scent of old wood, paper, and the mineral dryness of clay that has long since surrendered most of its moisture to time. Somewhere, the building settles with one soft creak, and then stillness returns. And here is the question we will hold gently, no arguing, no proving, no chasing. What if ancient Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? Not as a headline to fight about, not as a claim to defend, just as a soft curiosity to carry in steady hands, the way an archaeologist carries a fragile shard. If the question feels too sharp, you can let it blur. You don't have to solve it. Tonight, we only let it guide us, like a lantern on a slow path. Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Ancient Sleep Story. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. Now, let's return to the quiet place. A drawer slides open with a controlled hush. Not a sudden sound, more like a breath. Inside the drawer, objects rest in shallow trays, each with a label that feels like a whisper of order. Numbers, dates, places, careful handwriting. The past sits the way it was last left, measured, described, and waiting. If you want, take a slow breath in and let it out gently, as though you are matching the pace of that drawer, gliding open. The curator's hands, gloved, calm, lift something small. A clay prism about the length of a hand, its edges softened by time. Clay is humble. Clay does not sparkle. It does not demand attention the way gold does. When you hold it, it doesn't feel small. It feels like holding compressed seasons, floods and harvests, mornings and storms, all pressed into one quiet object. The prism turns under the lamp. 4 faces. Columns of wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, each line pressed with a reed stylus that is long gone. When the light catches the surface at an angle, the marks look like tiny cuts in dried riverbank mud. You can almost sense the original dampness of the clay, the careful pressure of a hand, the patience of writing that was never meant to be hurried. This is where our story begins, not in a desert of pyramids, but in a cool room where the mind can settle. Why do the oldest things often tell stories not through noise, but through controlled silence on nights like this? Perhaps because silence is a kind of protection. It keeps delicate meanings from shattering under loud certainty. It allows many truths to sit side by side. And if you're the kind of person who has carried too much during the day, too many notifications, too many demands, then controlled silence can feel like safety. The prism speaks in the language of order. It does not begin with drama. It begins with a structure, kingship, as something that arrives from elsewhere, something lowered into the world rather than invented inside it. In the Sumerian phrasing, kingship descends, and then it settles. It settles first in a city. That detail is gentle but important. The earliest seat of authority is not a person, it is a place, a chosen ground, a name in the soil, Eridu. Then kingship moves, city to city, station to station, like a mantle passed hand to hand. The sequence feels soothing in its regularity, the way a list can soothe, when you don't have to remember every item, only the rhythm of them. Eridu, then another, a slow procession of names that sound like wind moving through reeds. Let the names be like distant bells, soft, far away, never urgent. And then, quietly, without shouting, the record introduces a dividing line, a flood, not the kind of flood that appears as spectacle in modern films. Here, the flood is more like a seam in the earth. In archaeology, you sometimes see it as a pale band of ash, or a change in soil color, or a layer of silt that interrupts a sequence of floors. It is a boundary between before and after. The list resets, not because everything is forgotten, but because something is rearranged, a reset line. And that is where our question begins to change its shape. When someone says built on top of, the modern imagination often leaps to a hidden city under sand, streets and towers waiting like a stage set. But in the language of real excavation, built on top of can mean something quieter and more common, a new floor laid over an older floor, a new wall following an older line, a sacred footprint renewed because the footprint itself has become holy. In riverlands, cities grow upward as much as outward. People return to the same places again and again, rebuilding on what was already there. Over centuries, the ground becomes a layered archive, compacted floors, crushed reed mats, charcoal seams, tiny shards of pottery, evidence of ordinary lives continuing. And the more you understand this, the less sensational our question needs to be. What if Egypt was built on top of something older? Not necessarily a buried metropolis, but a buried logic of restoration. Sometimes the older layer is not stone. Sometimes it is a blueprint in the mind, a remembered pattern, a way of explaining authority. It comes from above, it is transferred, it can be reset and regranted, it must be restored. This is where the name Anunnaki enters the story, not as a loud claim, but as a category in ancient texts. Divine beings associated with decrees, destinies, and the ordering of the world. In that world view, before any named ruler, there is a framework. Before the first dynasty, there is a sense of arrangement, and arrangement, when it becomes human, often becomes architecture. The longer you sit with objects like this, the more you notice how gently they resist the modern urge for speed. A prism does not scroll, it does not refresh. It cannot be skimmed without losing its meaning. It asks for one thing only, attention measured in quiet minutes. And perhaps that is why museums can feel like shelters. They were built for continuity. Outside these walls, the city keeps moving, but in here, time behaves differently. It thickens, it slows, it becomes touchable, like air before rain. Even the dust seems settled on purpose, unbothered. You might notice the smallest sounds, the soft rubber of shoes on polished floor, the faint click of a latch, the whisper of paper as a tag is lifted and placed back down. Each sound arrives and leaves without demanding anything from you. And that is the kind of world these ancient texts describe too, not a world without storms, but a world that believes storms can be survived because order can return. A flood may come, but the plan resumes. A city may fall, but a city rises again on chosen ground. Somewhere in that thought, a door opens for sleep. You do not have to fix everything tonight. You only have to let order return in small ways. One breath, one slow turn, one gentle layer at a time. So in our quiet museum room, the prism becomes more than an artifact. It becomes a teacher of pacing. It invites us to think in layers rather than conclusions, Before the flood, after the flood, authority descending, authority settling, authority moving like a slow current through named places. If you'd like, you can let your breathing follow that layered rhythm. In, like a new layer of soft earth. Out, like dust settling on a shelf. Because you too have layers. The day is one layer, the week is another. Old worries sometimes sit beneath new ones. And rest does not always come from erasing them. Sometimes rest comes from placing a gentler layer over the sharper edges. In the museum, the curator turns the prism again and again. The motion is steady ritual. Read a column. Turn. Read. Turn. The physical act of rotation makes time feel manageable. It turns deep history into a calm sequence of steps, not a rush, not a chase. And if your mind wanders, if it drifts to tomorrow, to responsibilities, to the unfinished list, bring it back to the drawer, to the cool air, to the hush of order. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a soft lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. We will not force a verdict. We will not try to win the question. We will simply follow the thread it offers, because sometimes the most healing thing you can do is to let a mystery remain gentle, held, not solved. And so at the end of this first quiet step, we return to our anchor, the open drawer, the lamp, the clay prism resting in your imagination like a small weight that steadies rather than burdens. What if ancient Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? For now, we set the question beside you, like an object placed carefully back into its tray, safe, labeled, and calm. Before the drawer slides shut, your eyes catch another tray deeper inside, a darker object, heavier than clay, with faint lines that look like they were once meant to sing in stone. We won't lift it yet. We will only notice it, quietly, and let that gentle curiosity lead us into the next room of the night. The second tray sits deeper in the drawer, as if the museum itself has tucked it slightly farther from casual sight. Not hidden in the dramatic sense, just placed with the quiet instinct we use for fragile things. The object is darker than clay and colder to imagine. Stone carries a different patience. Clay remembers the softness of water. Stone remembers the firmness of pressure. The curator's hands pause for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for weight. Then the object is lifted. It isn't large, only a fragment, yet it carries ideas that feel larger than its weight. The lamp's circle of light lands on it like moonlight on a river rock. Lines appear, engraved, not pressed. Curves and straight strokes rather than wedges. A different script, a different way of saying, someone was here. Someone wanted this to last. If the clay prism felt like a small loaf of dried riverbank, this stone feels like a quiet cliff. It does not crumble. It does not flex. It does not forgive careless hands. And because it is stone, the story shifts with it, slowly, smoothly, like a camera panning from one landscape to another. Mesopotamia is a land that writes in clay because the ground itself offers clay, and because the rivers bring silt the way breath brings fog. Egypt, by contrast, writes in stone because the desert offers stone, and because stone suits a horizon that feels clean and certain, not better, not worse. Just different ways of meeting time. The curator turns the piece a few degrees and the carved lines catch the light. You can feel, even without seeing it, the deliberate steadiness of the carving, each stroke placed with patience, each mark a small commitment. And the question we are holding, what does it mean to be built on top of, becomes quieter still. Because sometimes built on top of is not a buried city. Sometimes it is a habit, the habit of believing that order comes first, that language sets foundations, that a world can be arranged by naming. There is an Egyptian idea preserved in a famous stone: creation begins as thought, and thought becomes speech, and speech becomes structure. In that story, the world is not born with an explosion, it is spoken into alignment. Words are not decoration, they are architecture. Imagine how soothing that is when your modern mind is crowded with noise. What if the earliest builders were not only stacking blocks, but stacking sentences? The museum's air stays cool and even, your breath can match it, in and out, as if you are fogging a mirror and watching the fog clear. The stone rests in the curator's hands, and it feels, in your imagination, like a warm weight placed against the palms. Not warm in temperature, but warm in meaning, because it has survived. In ancient Egypt, stone was not only material, it was vow. A vow that memory should not dissolve. A vow that the right words, spoken or carved, could keep the world from sliding into chaos. If you have ever wished for a vow like that in your own life, you are not alone. Picture the Nile at night. Dark water edged with silver, palms holding stillness, one small boat drifting as if the river is breathing. In the riverlands of Sumer, cities rose on tells, layered mounds built from repeated rebuilding. In Egypt, monuments rose from quarried stone, each block a decision that the line should be straight, the angle precise, the form enduring. Yet beneath both approaches is the same gentle desire to place life within an order that feels larger than one person's day. The clay prism described kingship as something lowered into the world, then settled into cities. The Egyptian stone tells another version of that same comfort, that order is spoken, assigned, and maintained. Two landscapes, two materials, one longing. And that is where the name Anunnaki can soften into something more human. In the Mesopotamian imagination, divine beings are associated with decrees, destinies, and the distribution of roles. In the Egyptian imagination, gods are associated with the naming of things, the setting of places, the alignment of mart, balance, rightness, the gentle geometry of what should be. Different stories, but both are ways to say there is a pattern beneath the chaos. Tonight, we do not need to decide which pattern is the real one. We only need to notice how patterns can soothe. The curator tilts the stone again, and you can almost hear the tool that carved it. A small, steady tap, not loud, just persistent. If you listen closely, you might hear the imaginary sound as a soft metronome. Tap, pause, tap, pause, a rhythm that does not rush, a rhythm that could lull a restless mind. In some accounts, that rhythm belongs to a particular moment of Egyptian thought, the idea that the heart holds the plan and the tongue releases it. The heart conceives, the tongue names, and what is named finds its place. It's a tender sequence, private, internal, then spoken softly into the shared world. You don't need the names of gods to feel the comfort of the pattern. You only need to feel how steady it is. If your own heart has been crowded today, imagine it as a small chamber finally emptied of echo. Imagine the tongue too relaxing, no longer forced to explain, persuade, defend, just resting behind closed lips, quiet as a folded sail. And picture, for a moment, the stone cutters by the river. The morning is pale, the air is dry enough that each breath feels clean. They work without hurry because stone does not reward hurry. A chisel touches the surface, and the sound is bright but brief. After each strike, there is a pause, just long enough for dust to settle, just long enough for the hand to adjust, just long enough for the mind to stay calm. Even the process is a kind of meditation. Measure, mark, strike, pause. It resembles, in a gentler way, the procedural world we heard on the clay prism. Assemblies, decrees, oaths, methods. Not as bureaucracy in the modern exhausting sense, but as reassurance. There is a way to do things. There is a sequence. There is a trusted order of steps. When you are tired, steps are kinder than leaps. So the stone resting under the lamp becomes more than evidence. It becomes a small lesson in alignment, a reminder that the past often tried to keep fear at bay by naming, arranging, repeating, by doing the same careful actions again and again until the world felt stable. If you like, let your breathing follow that steadiness now, in, like a measured line drawn with care, out, like fine dust settling back to the earth. And in that quiet moment, the thought of built on top of feels less like a sensational secret and more like a simple human habit. We lay calm patterns over uncertainty, the way a blanket settles over a restless body. And in that rhythm, the modern world fades. The day's sharp edges blur. Your shoulders might loosen without you asking them to. The room in which you are listening becomes gentler, as if it has stepped back a pace to give you space. It is strange, isn't it, that the oldest texts often feel calmer than the newest ones, perhaps because they were written for continuity, not urgency. They were written to outlast the writer, and when something is made to outlast its maker, it can afford to speak slowly. The curator returns the stone to its tray carefully, with a softness that seems almost excessive for such a hard material. But care is never excessive when the goal is preservation. The tray's foam cradles the object. The lamp's light slides away from it, and the lines on its surface become less insistent, more like faint tracks on a quiet beach. The drawer is still open. The clay prism still waits nearby, its wedges gentle in the light. And between clay and stone, we feel the shift of geography, from the marshy riverbanks of Mesopotamia to the bright, dry edges of the Egyptian desert. Built on top of. Sometimes it means stone placed on stone. Sometimes it means story placed on story. Sometimes it means a later culture borrowing a quiet grammar from an earlier one, the grammar of lists, of dynasties, of legitimacy, of this is how order arrives. There are Egyptian king lists too, some carved, some written, some broken into fragments that had to be reassembled by patient hands. And if you think of those fragments for a moment, pieces of papyrus separated by time, later gathered and placed side by side, you might feel a soft comfort. Even when memory breaks, people still try to mend it, not perfectly, just gently, as if the act of mending is itself the point. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory, feel free to share it below. The curator's fingers hover over the next tray, and you sense the coming shift. Something lighter, something that once flexed in the air. Paper, reed, fibers pressed into sheets, not as durable as stone, not as immediate as clay, something in between, something that carries both fragility and intimacy. A folded card beside it shows a faint sketch, an outline of a river, a delta, a coastline like a soft curve, a route, a way across. And in the corner of that sketch a small mark, not a modern arrow, but a tiny symbol that suggests a star. Not a star meant to shock you awake, only a star meant to guide. In the next part of our gentle journey, we will follow that quiet route, from riverbank to riverbank, from clay to papyrus, from the list of kings to the lived feeling of continuity, until the question of what lies beneath Egypt becomes less a rumor and more a meditation. For now, you can let the drawer stay open in your mind, like a door left ajar for safe dreams. One more slow breath in and out. As the lamp hums softly, and the museum holds its quiet, and the star waits patiently on the map. Very gently. The drawer remains open, but the feeling in the room changes as soon as the curator's hands reach for something lighter. stone and clay have their own gravity. They make the mind heavy in a comforting way. Paper does the opposite. Paper invites closeness. It feels like a breath held gently between two palms. A thin folder is lifted, and the sound is almost nothing, just a dry whisper, like a page turning in a room where everyone agrees to speak softly. Inside, a few pale fragments rest on dark backing, papyrus. Reed pressed into sheets, crossed and bonded, then dried under sun that once shone on the Nile. The edges are uneven, as if time has been nibbling patiently. Some pieces are no larger than a finger, some the size of a postcard, and each one carries ink that has softened from black into something like deep brown, the color of tea left too long in a cup. If you've ever held an old letter, creased, stained, and still tender, this feels familiar. Not because the words are the same, but because the intention is the same. Someone wanted to be understood beyond their own moment. The curator slides the folder under the lamp, and a small map card lies beside it. The map is not a modern print. It is a sketch made to guide a mind, not a machine. A river like a ribbon, a wedge of delta, a coastline curving like a quiet shoulder. Near the edge, a tiny star is drawn in a simple symbol, a small reminder that people once navigated by looking up. Tonight, that star will be our soft guide. If your eyes are tired, you don't need to picture every line. Let the idea be enough. A river, a shore, a star, and a gentle route between worlds. You can rest inside the simplicity of it. In the corner of the storage room, there is a small reading desk, nothing ornate, only practical. A lamp with a green shade pools light onto a blotter. A pencil lies there, unsharpened, to a gentle point, because even the tools are made to avoid harshness. Beside the pencil, a cup of water waits untouched, its surface so still it reflects the lamp like a second, softer moon. This is where the fragments are sometimes studied, not with urgency, but with the slow manners of care. One piece is lifted, turned, set down. Another is brought closer, and the eye searches for a curve of ink that might match, for a broken sign that might complete a word. The work is quiet enough that you can hear your own breathing inside it. If you listen closely, you might even imagine the faint sound of a brush, just one soft stroke and then a pause, clearing dust that has no intention of leaving quickly. Archaeology at its gentlest is not a hunt. It is a kind of listening, and listening is what we are doing too, because on nights when the mind is loud, you don't need more information. You need a steadier rhythm. You need the sense that there are people across centuries who also felt the world fracture and who responded by making something calm and ordered, a list, a line, a sequence, a name placed where it belongs. So when a papyrus breaks, the break is not only loss, it is also an invitation to patience. It says, move slowly, accept what is missing, keep what remains, let the gaps breathe. If you've ever lost a piece of your own story, an old relationship, a home you once knew, a season that ended too abruptly, then you know what it means to live with gaps. And perhaps you also know the surprising relief of not forcing the gap to close. Sometimes peace arrives when we stop gripping the missing parts and begin to soften around them. Tonight, you can let the gaps be gentle. The mind can rest even with unfinished edges, safely held here. In the archive, the papyrus fragments don't shout names. They offer partial phrases, a few signs here, a broken line there. And in that brokenness there is a kind of comfort. The past does not arrive whole. It arrives in pieces, and human hands, patient hands, learn to place the pieces side by side. This is the quiet work of memory, not to force perfection, but to create enough continuity that the heart can settle. In Egypt, scribes wrote lists the way builders laid foundations. They arranged names in order so the mind would not drift. A king followed a king, like breaths following breaths, like footfalls following footfalls on a long road. Even if the paper tore, the impulse remained. Keep the line. Keep the sense that time, though it moves, can be traced. Some lists survived in stone, some in ink, some are complete, many are not. Yet even a broken list can be soothing because it shows an older truth. Life is always partly missing, and still we go on arranging it into something that makes gentle sense. If you've had days that feel broken into fragments, messages, meetings, small demands that never become one smooth story, then you already understand why lists mattered. They are a way of saying, I am not lost, I can still follow the thread. The curator's finger points to a section where the ink grows faint. A gap. A tear. The mind wants to fill it, but the room teaches restraint. Not everything must be filled. Some spaces are meant to remain open, like a window left ajar for air. And that brings us back to our question, built on top of. In the calm language of archives, built on top of can mean layered ground, layered stone, layered stories, layered forms of legitimacy. It can mean a later culture inheriting the shape of an older reassurance. The world has an order. Authority has a source. The line can be restored after it breaks. If you've ever rebuilt your own calm after a difficult season, you already know what restoration feels like. It is not dramatic, it is quiet. It is repeating small acts until they become steady again. On the map card, the star seems to glimmer, not as a real light, but as a suggestion. Between Mesopotamia and Egypt, people traveled. Traders carried beads and copper, incense and cloth. Scribes carried stories. Priests carried rituals. Sometimes a single idea traveled, folded inside a traveler's mind like a scrap of paper tucked into a pocket. Ideas do not need armies to move. Sometimes they move on the backs of donkeys, in the hush of a caravan at dawn. Sometimes they move by water, on a boat that slides through reeds, its wake barely disturbing the surface. Picture that boat now if you like. A narrow hull, the river dark and calm, stars above like scattered salt. The oars dip and rise in a slow rhythm that does not hurry, because the river will arrive when it arrives. And while that boat moves, the world above it feels vast and steady. The sky has no notifications. The stars do not demand responses. They simply hold their positions, giving the human mind something gentle to rely on. Maybe that is why the star on the map card feels like kindness. The curator turns back to the papyrus. A name appears, then fades. Another name appears, then breaks off. The pattern is familiar. Presence, absence, presence, like breath in and out. There is a way these fragments change the mood of our question. When people ask about an Anunnaki city, the imagination wants a hidden place under sand, a secret staircase, a buried machine. But papyrus reminds us that the most influential structures are often not physical at all. They are conceptual. They are the quiet agreements people inherit. How to count time, how to name kings, how to explain why the world should feel ordered. In Mesopotamia, some texts spoke of authority descending, settling in cities, transferring by decree. In Egypt, some traditions spoke of order spoken into place, maintained by balance, renewed through ritual and rightful naming. Different metaphors, but both are ways to calm the same fear, that chaos might be final, and both offer the same gentle promise: chaos can be followed by restoration. If you are listening tonight from a bed, a couch, a quiet corner of your home, you might feel that promise as something physical. The sheet against your skin, the weight of a blanket, the steady hum of night outside, these are your small restorations, You don't have to excavate your own mind with sharp tools. You can brush it softly like an archaeologist dusting a delicate edge, just enough to reveal what is there, just enough to breathe. The curator places a clear protective sheet over the fragments, not to hide them, but to keep them safe. The gesture feels like tucking something in, and then, slowly, the folder closes. The papyrus disappears into darkness, but the feeling remains. Even broken things can carry a line of continuity. Even fragments can hold a world. The star on the map card is the last thing to catch the light, a simple mark, a quiet guide. It suggests that our journey will leave the storage room soon, not in a rush, not with drama, but with the soft curiosity of someone stepping outside at midnight to look up. In the next part, we will follow that star beyond the museum walls. We will let the archive become landscape. We will walk, slowly, into the riverlands and deserts where these materials were born, and we will listen for the calm patterns that people built, layer by layer, to survive their own long nights. For now, you can let the map rest beside you in the dark. You don't need to hold it tightly. You only need to know it is there. One slow breath in and out. And let the star remain steady and small as the drawer begins to glide inward with its gentle hush. The drawer has begun to glide inward, but it does not slam shut. It closes the way eyelids close, slowly, almost politely, until the gap becomes a thin line of darkness, and then not even that. The lamp remains on though, and the room still holds its cool, patient air. In a museum after hours, nothing feels hurried, even endings arrive softly. And yet the small star on the map card stays with you. It lingers behind your eyes like a gentle afterimage. A reminder that stories are not only kept in drawers, they are also carried over water, over sand, through the quiet space between two breaths. So we leave the storage room in the easiest way possible, not by pushing a heavy door, not by stepping into noise, but by letting imagination do what it was designed to do. It opens a path without strain. Picture the museum corridor now, empty and dim. Your footsteps are quiet, cushioned by the building's willingness to sleep. Somewhere far away, a security light blinks once, then again, as steady as a lighthouse. You pass a tall window, and beyond it the night is spread out, soft, dark, generous. The world outside is not demanding anything from you. It is simply there. If you like, take a slow breath in and let it out as if you're exhaling into that open night. Outside, the air feels different, less filtered, more alive. You can smell the faint mineral note of pavement cooling after day heat. A distant car moves through an intersection, sound softened by space. And then, as if someone lowers the volume of the modern world, you begin to hear a quieter layer beneath, wind in leaves, a dog's bark far away, the hush that arrives when a city finally loosens its grip. The star on the map becomes clearer. Back in the archive, the lamp will wait, a quiet sentinel. No alarms, no judgments, only the gentle certainty that every artifact can be returned safely again. It points not to a single place, but to a direction, toward the old riverlands where writing began, where kingship was listed, where floods drew seams through memory. We travel gently, as in a dream that knows how to keep the heart calm. First there is water, not the bright blue water of postcards, but the slow, dark water of evening. A river that reflects the sky like a long, patient mirror. In Mesopotamia, the rivers were the lifelines, the Tigris and Euphrates, braiding the land into marshes and fertile edges. In Egypt, it was the Nile, a single long ribbon that made a green world inside a desert. Tonight, imagine that all rivers are connected by the same quiet intention: to carry, to deposit, to renew. We arrive in the south of ancient Mesopotamia, where the land is low and soft and the horizon feels wide. Eridu is not a city of shining towers in this vision. It is a mound, an old place built by many hands over many seasons. A tell, a layered hill made of floors, walls, broken pots, reed mats, and the compressed dust of ordinary lives. If you could stand there at dawn, the air would be cool and the light would be pale gold. Birds would move above the reeds. The ground under your feet would feel firm and slightly gritty, like earth that has been walked on for thousands of years and has learned to hold itself together. Archaeologists speak of layers, but you don't need the vocabulary tonight. You can feel the layers as a simple truth. People came here, built, lived, repaired, rebuilt, and in doing so they made time into a stack, built on top of. The phrase becomes almost tender when you see it this way. A new floor over an old floor, a new doorway cut where an older doorway once stood, a shrine raised where another shrine had been, because the place itself had become a promise. It is easy to imagine a potter here, hands wet with clay, shaping a bowl while the river breathes nearby. The bowl is for grain, for water, for daily meals, nothing dramatic. Yet in the background of that ordinary life, something larger is happening. Someone is pressing signs into clay, making language visible. Someone is listing names, tracing authority, trying to keep the world from dissolving into forgetfulness. Now, very gently, the scene shifts. A seam appears in the earth, not a crack you can fall into, not a disaster you must relive, but a change in color. A pale band of silt laid down by floodwater. It's quiet evidence. The flood is not a roar here. It is a line. Before the line, one set of memories. After the line, another. And yet life continues. A floor is laid. A wall is repaired. A list begins again. The world is reset, not because it is easy, but because it is possible. If your own life has seams, moments that split before and after, you don't have to touch the pain of them tonight. Just notice the gentler truth beneath. You are still here. You have built small continuities across your own floodlines. You have restored what you could, and you have learned to live with what could not be restored. In the distance, a boat moves through reeds. Its wake is barely visible. A single lantern glows on the bow, not bright, but steady. The person inside the boat is not rushing. They are traveling the way the night prefers, slowly enough that the heart can stay calm. Then, as softly as a camera dissolving from one landscape to another, we drift westward. The river becomes a different river. The reeds change, the air turns drier, the horizon brightens even at night because deserts hold moonlight in a special way. And soon you can feel the Nile, long, steady, almost ceremonial. On the Nile, the night is not empty. It is filled with the sound of water touching wood, of insects singing in the dark, of distant voices carried across the surface. There is a scent of damp soil near the banks, and beyond that the faint sweetness of plants. And then, just beyond the green strip, the desert begins, quiet, patient, pale. Egypt is a place where the sky feels close and huge at the same time. Stars seem sharper. The moon draws clearer edges. Even silence feels structured, as if the land itself prefers order. Built on top of. Here, the phrase takes another form. Not only floors over floors, but stone over stone, blocks aligned, joints measured, angles repeated until a shape becomes inevitable. The desire is the same as in Eridu, to make something stable enough that human life can rest against it. Imagine a scribe sitting near a lamp. The lamp is not electric. It is a small flame, controlled and calm. The scribe's palette holds black and red ink. A reed pen is dipped, lifted, and the hand moves with practiced steadiness. A list forms, names of rulers, years, sequences. The list is not merely administration, it is comfort. It is a way to say, time is not chaos, time can be traced. Now imagine that list breaking. Papyrus tears, fire touches a corner, water stains an edge. Centuries pass, and later other hands, patient, gentle, gather the fragments and place them side by side, not forcing what doesn't fit, but honoring what remains. If you're listening tonight with a mind that feels fragmented, let that image be an embrace. You do not have to be whole to be worthy of rest. You can be pieced together by kindness, your own kindness, slowly offered. And now we return to the idea that creation itself might be spoken into place. In some Egyptian thought, the heart conceives, the tongue commands, and the world takes shape. Words become foundations. Language becomes a kind of blueprint. Not loud words, not slogans, but measured naming. This belongs here, that belongs there. This is the order that keeps the night from swallowing everything. When you hear that, the Anunnaki question shifts again, becoming softer, less literal. What if Anunnaki city is not a buried street grid, but a metaphor for the older layer of thought beneath later monuments? A layer that says, order comes from above, authority is granted, the world can be reset and restored. If that idea feels too abstract, you can let it become simple. Humans, everywhere, have long built calm patterns on top of fear. And perhaps that is what you are doing right now, listening to a slow story in the dark, building a pattern of breathing on top of the day's noise. In and out. The river carries names, the river carries silt, the river carries boats. It carries old fears away from the shore and brings new soil in their place. It is both eraser and writer, gentle in both roles. A small wind rises, palm fronds rustle. Somewhere, an owl calls once, then goes quiet. The night remains kind. And at the edge of the desert, beyond the green, you can see two stone shapes that seem to hold moonlight. Not close enough to overwhelm you, only distant enough to feel like a promise. The promise is not that everything is solved. The promise is that something endures. We don't need to decide tonight whether Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city. We only need to notice that both Mesopotamia and Egypt understood a similar comfort. The past is layered and restoration is possible. In the next part, we will return, briefly, to the museum's cool room, and we will lift one more object from its tray. Something that connects lists and creation, floods and foundations in a single, gentle arc. We will look at how procedure can feel like lullaby, and how the quiet repetition of order can guide the mind into sleep. For now, let the river keep moving in your imagination, slow and steady. Let it carry the day's leftover thoughts away, like reeds carrying shadows on their surface. Take one more soft breath in and out, and allow the star above the river to remain exactly where it is, small, steady, and enough. Back in the museum, the corridor's darkness feels softer now, as if it has learned your pace. The storage room welcomes you again without ceremony. The lamp is still there. The desk is still there. The air is still cool and faintly mineral, like stone that remembers shade. The curator returns to the drawer and opens it with that controlled hush, the sound like a gentle curtain being drawn aside. Inside, beside the clay prism and the folder of papyrus, there is one more object, flat, rectangular, and darker than the others. It is clay too, but not shaped into a prism. It is a tablet, like a small window pane made from earth. When the curator lifts it, you can imagine the weight, not heavy enough to strain the wrist, but heavy enough to feel serious. The surface is slightly uneven and the wedge marks are smaller here, closer together, like a field of tiny footprints after rain. If you like, let your breathing slow to match the careful movement of those hands. In, as the tablet rises into the light. Out, as it rests, safe, above the tray. This tablet holds a story that many cultures carry in one form or another. A flood, a boundary, a before and after. But what makes this tablet different, what makes it strangely soothing, is not the flood itself. It is the way the story is organized. The ancient mind that pressed these wedges did not only want to remember danger, it wanted to remember continuity. It wanted to remember the steps by which life returned to order. In the text, the flood is a seam in time, a line drawn across the archive, and then beyond that line, the world resumes in a sequence that feels almost like a lullaby. Names, places, transfers, restorations. Kingship is granted again. Cities receive their portion. The structure returns, not with fireworks, but with procedure. Procedure can sound cold in modern life. It can sound like paperwork, waiting rooms, and bright fluorescent lights. But in the ancient world, procedure could mean something else. The reassurance that chaos was not the final language. The reassurance that there were steps and that steps could be followed even by tired hands. Tonight, we are not here to debate the tablet's exact historical details. We are here to listen to its mood, the mood of a universe that prefers order, that rebuilds in calm increments, that believes in the quiet power of how. How is the world restored? How is authority placed? How do names find their place again? The curator tilts the tablet under the lamp, and the wedges brighten along one edge, dim along another. You can almost feel the ancient reed stylus pressing and lifting, each motion a small act of steadiness. The writing is physical. It is the opposite of scrolling. It requires touch. It requires pauses, and pauses are what your mind has been craving. So let's imagine the scene behind the tablet's words, not as spectacle, but as softness. A river rises, it spills beyond its banks. Water becomes a wide, quiet force, not roaring like a monster, but moving with the indifferent patience of nature. Homes made of reeds and mud shift, drift, dissolve. People climb to higher ground. The sky is grey. The air tastes of wet silt. And then, after the water retreats, the land is changed. But here, listen, this is where the tablet becomes gentle. It does not linger on panic. It does not savor terror. It marks the flood as a boundary, and then it turns its face toward rebuilding. There is a moment in recovery when people stop staring at what is gone and begin to ask simple questions. Where will we place the first post? Where will we lay the first brick? Who will speak for the group? Which path is safe? Those questions are humble. They do not look heroic, yet they are the beginning of peace. In the ancient imagination, kingship is lowered again, and it settles again. The language matters. It is not seized. It is not invented from emptiness. It is granted, transferred, assigned. The rhythm is procedural, and that rhythm can feel like a hand on the shoulder, built on top of. Now the phrase feels less like a rumor and more like a method. Life builds on what remains. A community rebuilds on the habits that survived: meeting, deciding, swearing, distributing, measuring. Somewhere in the text, you can almost hear a council, people gathered, not shouting, but speaking in turns. A leader does not become leader by loudness alone, but by the slow consent of the group. Oaths are spoken, tasks are named. The world becomes livable again, one agreement at a time. And if your own life has felt unlivable on certain days, you may recognize this quiet medicine. Agreement with yourself. A small plan, a simple sequence, not everything at once, just the next step. If you'd like, take a breath in as though you are agreeing to rest. and exhale as though you are allowing the next step to be small. The tablet, in its patient way, suggests that stability is not a sudden miracle. It is repetition. It is returning to the same careful acts until they become shelter. This is the soft discovery hidden in old records. Civilizations did not only rise through conquest or brilliance, they rose through routine, through calendars, through lists, through the quiet work of keeping water where it belongs, grain where it belongs, names where they belong. And here the path bends gently toward Egypt again. Because if Mesopotamia learned to soothe itself with lists of kings and procedures of restoration, Egypt learned to soothe itself with alignment of stone, of words, of cosmic balance. Two different accents in the same language of reassurance. On the Nile, after the annual inundation, fields were renewed, silt settled, borders had to be remeasured, markers had to be reset, land was redistributed. That too is procedure. That too is a way of saying the flood happened, and we are still here. You can almost feel the scene: early morning light, a thin mist rising off water, men walking with measuring ropes, stakes, and calm concentration, not racing, not arguing, simply restoring the lines that make life possible. In the distance, a temple wall catches the sun. A scribe waits with a palette and reed pen. Words will record what hands rebuild. And because words are recorded, memory becomes steadier than fear. The curator sets the flood tablet down on the desk, and for a moment, it feels like the center of the room's quiet. The lamp hums. The night outside the museum windows continues without interruption. Your own room, wherever you are listening, begins to feel more distant from its daytime meaning. It becomes simply a place to rest. And the question we began with, Egypt, built on top of an Anunnaki city, loosens, becoming more symbolic, more humane. What if the city beneath is the older layer of thought, the belief that order can be granted, restored, spoken into place, the belief that after a seam in time, the world can return by following steps. In that sense, the Anunnaki are less a secret and more a metaphor for principles, decrees, destinies, the allocation of roles. And Egypt, in its own language, becomes another expression of the same comfort: ma'at, balance, alignment, rightful naming. Two riverlands, one gentle longing to live inside a pattern that feels safe. If your eyelids are heavy now, that is a good sign. You do not need to keep every detail. Let the details drift like silt in water. Keep only the feeling, a flood line, a return to order, a slow rebuilding, a steady breath. If you prefer a simple frame for the mind, something steady to hold without effort, you can let the story settle into a quiet set of questions, like stones placed in a small circle. Who is speaking on the tablet? A careful scribe, likely seated close to a doorway where the light is kind, pressing a reed into clay with a patience that does not need applause. What is being told? Not only a flood, but the gentler truth that after water withdraws, people return to each other and to the calm work of arranging life. When does it happen? In a far time, the tablet calls before and after, a timeless rhythm that repeats wherever seasons turn and rivers rise. Where does it happen? In the lowlands of reeds and silt, and then by echo along the Nile's green ribbon, where measurement and memory walk side by side. Why record it? Because fear fades, but written order can remain, and when it remains, tired hearts find something solid to lean on. And how does the world heal? Slowly, with steps, meeting, deciding, promising, rebuilding, until the seam becomes part of the cloth instead of a tear. If that feels like too much to hold, let it become only one small thought. The how can be gentle. You can rebuild your own night the same way. One soft breath, one loosened muscle, one quiet permission to rest right now. The curator lifts the tablet one final time and returns it to its tray. The motion is unhurried. The drawer begins to close, and the sound is that familiar hush, like a lullaby without melody. As the drawer settles shut, the lamp's circle of light narrows on the desk. The map card with the star rests beside the folded folder of papyrus. The clay prism waits in its tray. Everything is back in its place. And in you, too, something can return to its place. In the next part, we will step nearer to the desert edge at night, where stone holds moonlight and wind makes quiet patterns in sand. We will let the idea of building on top of become an image you can feel. Layers of flaws, layers of stories, layers of calm placed gently over the day. For now, simply breathe. In, out. And let procedure become comfort, not burden. A soft rhythm that tells your mind the world knows how to restore itself, and so do you. Night in the desert is not empty. It is full of small, steady presences. The cooling of stone, the slow drift of air, the faint whisper of sand grains shifting as they settle into new positions. If you have ever stood outside after midnight and felt the world finally loosen its grip, you already know the desert's secret language. It doesn't ask you to think faster. It invites you to think softer. Imagine we have left the museum again, not by hurrying, but by letting the story carry us. The door closes behind us with a gentle click, and the city becomes a distant murmur. We follow the star on the map card, quiet, patient, until the air grows drier and the horizon grows wider. There is a road of pale dust beneath our feet. It feels cool, almost silky, like a fabric the day has stopped wearing. Ahead, the land opens into a broad, moonlit plain. The sky is deep and untroubled, scattered with stars that seem sharper than they do above busy streets. Here, the night is clean. Sound travels differently. Even your own breathing feels like part of the landscape. If you'd like, breathe in slowly, as if you were tasting the coolness of the air, and breathe out as if you were placing a soft veil over everything that felt too loud today. In the distance, stone shapes rise, simple at first, then more distinct as we drift closer in our imagination. Not an overwhelming spectacle, but a calm geometry on the horizon. The desert does not throw these forms at you. It allows them to appear gradually, the way a thought becomes clear only after you stop forcing it. A temple wall catches the moon. A line of blocks holds its shape with quiet confidence. You can sense the countless hands that placed them. Not frantic hands, working hands. Hands that learned how to repeat the same careful motion until it became a kind of piece. Built on top of. Here, the phrase is almost visible. You can picture older foundations beneath newer floors, earlier shrines beneath later courts. You can imagine a sacred footprint kept alive by rebuilding, each generation placing its own layer gently over the last, not to erase it, but to continue it. The sand itself is a teacher of layers. It drifts, it settles, it covers, it reveals. A footprint appears, then softens, then disappears, not with violence, but with patience. And if the wind shifts, the footprint can appear again. Faint, partial, like a memory returning without demand. You might notice something soothing in that. Nothing is permanently lost. It changes form. It moves into another layer. As we walk, the sand feels cool and fine, like sifted flour, giving slightly under each step and then returning to stillness. Every footfall is absorbed, as if the desert is designed to soften impact. No sharp echoes, no hard replies. The air smells faintly of minerals and distance. Somewhere far away a thin wind moves, not as a gust, but as a long, slow exhale, sliding across the dunes and smoothing their ridges. If you are listening tonight after a day of screens and schedules, you may feel the contrast in your body. In the modern world, the mind is pulled in a dozen directions at once, an inbox that never ends, headlines that ask for emotion, tasks that stack like towers. Here, none of that can survive. The desert does not know your deadline is. It does not argue with your worries. It simply offers space. Space wide enough for shoulders to drop and jaw to soften gently. And in that space you might quietly notice the oldest kind of story structure, so simple it feels like breathing. Who are we tonight? Just a traveler and a listener sharing one slow path. Where are we? On the edge of sand and stone, where the Nile's green has faded behind us. When is it? A calm hour between midnight and dawn, when even history seems to yawn. Why are we here? To feel how order can be gentle, how silence can be safe. And how do we travel? With small steps, with steady attention, with the simplest ritual of all. Inhale, exhale, and let the night carry the rest. Let that permission settle. You don't have to hold the whole world in your hands tonight. You can place it down the way a tired worker places down a tool at the end of a shift. You can let your thoughts become fewer, like stars you can count without strain. One, and another, until counting becomes a lullaby and the need to control begins to loosen, gently, without resistance. We approach the edge of the plateau, where the desert falls away into a shallow valley. The air is still, and the silence feels structured, the way the museum's silence felt structured. You can hear a small sound, not a voice, not a call, but the faint scrape of sand along stone, as if the night is brushing the monument the way an archivist brushes dust from an artifact. Somewhere nearby, a small fire burns. Its flame is low and steady, not flickering wildly. Around it, a few figures sit, travelers, workers, guards of an earlier time. Their faces are calm, lit by amber light that makes every movement slower. They speak in quiet tones. They are not performing for anyone. One of them pours water into a cup. The sound is gentle, like a small river in miniature. Another wraps a cloak tighter around their shoulders, then relaxes, content to watch the flame. A third looks up at the stars, the same stars we have been following. Their gaze is not urgent. It is trusting. This is how people have always survived the dark, with small circles of light, with shared quiet, with routines that reassure the body it is safe. In ancient Egypt, the desert was not only a boundary, it was also a backdrop that made order feel precious. Along the Nile's green ribbon, life was rich and possible. Beyond it, the sand stretched on, indifferent and pure. Between the two, monuments rose as if to say, "We belong to the living river, and we also belong to the endless sky." Think of the builders at dawn. The day begins cool, almost gentle. Tools are laid out, wooden mallets, copper chisels, measuring cords, plumb lines. The work starts not with shouting, but with alignment. A line is stretched, a corner is checked, a level is tested. Each act is simple. Each act is repeated. Over time, repetition becomes structure, and structure becomes shelter for meaning. If your mind has been tired of improvising, tired of reacting, there is comfort in imagining this. A world where the next step is known, where the body can trust the sequence. And there is another comfort here, quieter still. In Egypt, words were treated like building stones, not loud words, measured words, names that anchored reality, titles that explained roles, hymns that described balance, lists that made time feel walkable. A scribe sits in the shadow of a wall, away from the glare. A small palette rests on their lap, and a reed pen moves with steady grace. They write not to impress, but to preserve. They record not only events, but patterns, who follows whom, what returns after what, how the world keeps its rhythm. You can almost hear the pen's whisper on papyrus, softer than breath. And if we drift even deeper into the feeling beneath the records, we find a calm principle. Civilizations rarely believed they were inventing from nothing. They often believed they were restoring, rebuilding, returning to a pattern that existed before disruption. That is the gentle bridge back to the Anunnaki question. What if built on top of is not a secret staircase, but a human instinct to rebuild on older patterns, of authority descending, of order being assigned, of balance being spoken into place? What if the city beneath is a layer of thought, carried across rivers and centuries, expressed in different materials, but always offering the same quiet promise? The world can be arranged again. If that feels too abstract, let it become an image instead. Picture a floor in a temple courtyard. The surface is smooth, worn by feet. Beneath it lies an older floor, cracked and buried. Beneath that lies another. The floors are like pages in a book that no one reads all at once. They are simply there, holding the weight of time. Now picture your own day as a floor. Not perfect, perhaps scratched, perhaps messy. And beneath it lie older days, some bright, some heavy. You do not need to dig them up tonight. You can let them remain as layers that have carried you here. The moon climbs a little higher. The stone shapes in the distance turn paler, as if they are made from light itself. The fire's glow softens. The travelers' voices fade into murmurs, then into silence. In that silence you may feel a small opening in your chest, the way calm sometimes arrives without announcement. It is not excitement, it is a settling, like dust resting, like water smoothing its surface, and in that settling, a new way of holding the mystery appears. We can place the question, Egypt built on top of an Anunnaki city, into the desert sand, not as a demand, but as a pebble. We can leave it there under the stars. It does not need to be answered tonight. It only needs to be gentle enough that it does not wake you. If this story brought you calm, leave a gentle comment for yourself. Don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys. For now, let the desert keep its quiet. Let the monuments keep their patient shape. Let the wind move softly over the sand, drawing and redrawing patterns that never insist, never hurry. Take one last slow breath in and out, and allow your thoughts to become as spacious as the night sky, wide, dark, and safe. The desert stays behind us like a wide, quiet blanket. Even as we return to the museum in our imagination, a trace of that open sky remains, as if the stars have followed you into the building and hung themselves gently above the ceiling. The corridor is still dim. The air is still cool. The world is still willing to speak softly. Inside the storage room, the lamp waits over the desk like a patient moon. The drawer is closed now, but the room holds the memory of what was inside. Clay that remembers rivers, stone that remembers pressure, papyrus that remembers hands. And somewhere in you, a small steadiness has begun to form. Nothing dramatic, only a calmer rhythm, like a tide that has stopped arguing with the shore. Tonight, we have carried one question carefully. What if ancient Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? We have let the question soften. We have let it become less like a claim and more like a doorway. And now, to walk through that doorway without waking the mind, we do something ancient and surprisingly kind. We make a list. Not a list you must memorize, not a list that demands productivity. A list that behaves like a lighthouse on a foggy coast, steady, predictable, and gentle enough that you can relax into it. The curator opens a book on the desk, not a modern, glossy catalogue, but a quiet notebook filled with pencil marks and softened edges. The pages are cream-coloured, slightly wavy, as if they have absorbed years of careful air. A column of names runs down one page, some clear, some tentative, some followed by a small question mark that looks more like humility than doubt. Lists appear again and again in the ancient world. King lists, offering lists, inventory lists, star lists. The modern mind sometimes sees lists as cold, but the ancient mind often used them as comfort. A list is a way of saying the world is not random, the world can be ordered, time can be traced by naming, and naming is one of the gentlest forms of control humans have ever invented. Not the control that dominates, but the control that soothes. When you name a thing, you give it a boundary. When you place it in sequence, you give it a path. When you accept that some names are missing, you give the path room to breathe. The curator's pencil taps the page once, softly, like a heartbeat. Then the tip slides down the column as if following a slow river of ink. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurapak. You do not need to know what each city was. You do not need to picture their walls or their streets. You can let the names function the way lullabies do, as sound and rhythm, as a gentle pattern that steadies the mind. In the distance of time, each name is a small stone in a long bridge. Then the bridge reaches the seam, the flood. In these records, the flood is not only a tragedy, it is also punctuation. It divides the sentence of time into two clauses, before and after. And after the flood, the list begins again, as if the world has been given another chance to arrange itself. So this is a soft discovery that can feel surprisingly personal. Many of us carry floodlines too, a year when everything changed, a loss, a move, a medical scare, a heartbreak, a sudden new responsibility. The old sequence breaks, and for a while, the days feel unnumbered. But then quietly, we begin listing again. Wake up, make coffee, answer one message, take a slow walk, fold the laundry, turn off the lights. These are not dramatic victories, but they are restoration. They are the humble procedures that rebuild a life. In Mesopotamia, the divine world was imagined as a council that assigns, decisions are distributed, roles are granted. The Anunnaki in many stories belong to that atmosphere, beings associated with decrees, with destinies, with the administrative calm of this goes here. It can sound strange to modern ears, cosmic paperwork, but there is a hidden tenderness in it. If the universe has procedures, perhaps chaos is not absolute. And in Egypt, the tenderness arrives in another accent. Order is ma'at, balance, alignment, the rightful placement of things. It is not only moral, it is structural. It is the straightness of a wall, the fairness of a measure, the reliability of the sun's return. In some Egyptian teachings, the heart conceives and the tongue speaks, and what is spoken takes its place. Words become scaffolding. Naming becomes foundation. So when we ask, built on top of, we can hear a new meaning. Built on top of inherited ways of making order, feel real. Not a single secret, a pattern. Across cultures, certain patterns repeat because they help people sleep inside history. Lists, rituals, measurements, repeatable steps. The quiet confidence of we have done this before. The curator flips a page. A sketch appears, an outline of a stone slab with a few carved lines copied by hand. The drawing is simple, almost childlike, but it carries the essence. Language as architecture. In the margin, a note reads, in small script, creation through speech, order by naming. The curator does not underline it. The curator does not circle it. They simply leave it there as if trust is enough. If you're listening tonight with your body heavy and your mind still roaming, you might try something gentle. Imagine your thoughts as names on a list. One thought appears, you acknowledge it. You place it on the page, then you let the pencil move on. Work thought, family thought, health thought, future thought. You don't have to solve them, just name them. And when a thought is named, it often loses the sharpness that keeps you awake. It becomes part of an order you can live with. In the museum, the lamp hums. The quiet is so steady that even memory seems to slow down. The curator closes the notebook and rests a palm on the cover, as if blessing the simple act of sequence. Now the question returns softly, like a tide touching the shore again. What if Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? What if instead Egypt was built on top of an older human habit? To imagine that authority comes from above, that chaos can be followed by restoration, that naming and measuring can keep the night from becoming endless. This interpretation does not cancel wonder, it deepens it, because it suggests that the most ancient city beneath monuments might be invisible, built from concepts, from stories, from the soothing geometry of order. And if that's true, then you are part of it. Every time you rebuild your calm after a hard day, you participate in the same ancient instinct. You place a small stone of routine on top of yesterday's rubble. You lay a soft floor of breath over a restless mind. You restore. Outside the museum window, the night remains dark, but it feels kinder now. The city's noises are distant, softened. A passing car is a gentle hush, not a threat. Somewhere, a street light flickers once, then steadies like a little lighthouse. The curator stands and crosses the room to another cabinet, smaller, older, with a lock that looks more ceremonial than necessary. The key turns with a soft click. Inside, there is a narrow tray holding a cylinder seal, tiny, carved, meant to roll across wet clay and leave a repeating image. The seal is placed on the desk. Its surface is worn, but the carvings are still visible. Figures in profile, a star above, a line that could be a river, a gesture that could be blessing or decree. It is small enough to fit between two fingers, yet it once carried authority. It once made a document official. It once turned procedure into art. The curator does not roll it yet. They only set it down and let the lamp's light touch it, revealing the faint ridges like the rings of an old tree. Before sleep takes you farther, notice how small this tool is. A cylinder seal is almost playful, like a child's rolling pin, yet it was a signature, a promise, a way of saying, "This is real." In the ancient riverlands, a seal could close a jar, authorize a delivery, mark an agreement between neighbors, or confirm a gift for a temple. It turned private intention into public order, and it did so with beauty because the image repeated and repetition is soothing. Egypt had its own echoes of this habit. Scarab seals, stamp seals, carved names in cartouches, small objects that carried identity the way a lantern carries flame. When you press or roll them, the same design returns again, faithful and calm. You can imagine how reassuring that must have felt in a world of floods and shifting borders. The mark appears, the pattern is consistent, the story holds. Tonight, let that be a gentle lesson for the body. Consistency can be kindness, a slow bedtime routine, a familiar blanket, a repeated breath. These are your own seals. They imprint calm onto the clay of the moment, leaving a pattern the nervous system recognizes as safe. And if your thoughts wander, simply roll them back to one steady image, moonlight on the desk, and your breathing beside it, quietly. And here is our quiet cliffhanger for the next step of the journey. If we roll this seal across clay, what pattern will appear? Will it show a council, a king, a star, a boundary line like a flood seam? or something even gentler, a repeated reminder that order, once imagined, can be made visible again and again. For now, we let the seal rest, unrolled like a promise not yet opened. You don't need to lean forward, you don't need to sharpen your attention. Just let curiosity remain soft like a candle that burns low and steady beside the bed. Take one slow breath in and out, and allow the list inside you to grow quiet, name by name, until it becomes a lighthouse fading into fog. The cylinder seal rests on the desk like a small sleeping creature, quiet and self-contained. Under the lamp, its carved ridges hold thin shadows, and the shadows feel soft as if they were drawn with charcoal on warm paper. The curator's fingers hover above it, not eager, not dramatic, simply attentive. In a room like this, attention is a kind of kindness. Outside the museum, the city continues in its distant way, traffic lights changing, a late bus sighing at a stop, a far-off siren dissolving before it can reach the windows. Inside, the air remains cool, even and controlled, as if the building itself has learned how to breathe slowly. If your body is ready for rest, let it sink a little deeper. Let the jaw unclench by a single degree. Let the shoulders soften as if a small weight has been lifted and placed down beside you. Now the curator places a thin sheet of soft clay on the blotter. Not wet, not messy, only pliant enough to accept an imprint the way a calm mind accepts a gentle thought. The clay's surface is smoothed with the side of a hand, a slow pass. Another slow pass. The motion is steady, and it invites your breathing to become steady too. In, as the hand glides, out. As the clay becomes even, the seal is lifted between thumb and forefinger. It is smaller than you might expect a mark of authority to be. That smallness is part of its beauty. It suggests that power in many ancient places did not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrived with a tiny object and a repeated pattern, quiet proof that something had been agreed upon. The curator sets the seal at the edge of the clay and begins to roll it forward. At first, nothing seems to happen. Then slowly, a line appears as if the clay is remembering an image it has seen before. Figures emerge in profile, calm, stylized, patient, a star, a line that could be a river, a seated form, a standing form, hands lifted in a gesture that might be greeting or blessing or the orderly acknowledgement of roles. The seal keeps rolling and the pattern repeats again, again, again. Repetition is the oldest lullaby. The mind relaxes when it knows what comes next. It is one reason waves soothe us, and trains soothe us, and rain on a roof can feel like a blanket. The seal's image is not meant to surprise, it is meant to confirm. It says, the same mark returns, the agreement holds, the world remains legible. If you are listening tonight with thoughts that keep looping, you can borrow this kind of repetition without fear. Let one calm sentence repeat inside you, like a seal rolling forward on clay. I am safe in this moment. I am safe in this moment. I am safe in this moment. No need to believe it with force. Just let the sentence imprint softly. The curator stops rolling and lifts the seal away. The clay now holds a small procession of images, each one clear enough to recognize, each one gentle enough to avoid waking the mind. The lamp's light touches the new ridge lines and the shadows look like miniature dunes built on top of. Here, in the simplest way, you can see what the phrase truly means. The mark on the clay is not a single event, it is a layer placed onto an existing surface. The clay was smooth, then it received the pattern. Nothing underneath was destroyed. The surface was simply given a new texture, an added order. Civilizations often did the same thing with their stories. They rolled patterns across older layers. They pressed familiar images into new materials. They repeated forms because repetition creates safety. In Mesopotamia, the seal might show a divine assembly, beings who decide, assign, and distribute. In that world, the Anunnaki could be imagined as part of the council, the quiet administrators of destiny. The image does not need to announce their names, it only needs to suggest the atmosphere. Order is not accidental, order is decided, order is placed. In Egypt, a similar atmosphere appears through different symbols, through the balance of Mayat, through the emphasis on rightful naming, through the repeated alignment of lines and stones. Different heart, same human wish. Let the world be stable enough to live in. The curator traces one finger along the imprint without touching it, following the line like someone following a shoreline on a map. The finger pauses at the star. A star can mean many things. Guidance, fate, the quiet steadiness of something that does not rush. It can also mean a simple comfort. While human days change, the sky keeps its pattern. That is why sailors looked up. That is why desert travelers looked up. That is why you, tonight, might find comfort simply imagining a sky that does not demand anything from you. If you'd like, picture that star above your own room, above your ceiling, above the roof, above the whole neighborhood. Steady, unbothered, keeping its place. The curator turns the clay sheet slightly so the imprint catches the light from another angle. The figures seem to move, not because they are alive, but because the mind likes to animate what it finds familiar. A small story rises, a meeting, a decision, a blessing, a transfer, not conquest, not panic. A meeting, and this is where our soft discovery deepens. When people imagine hidden cities and secret builders, they often imagine drama, tunnels, machines, sudden revelations. But the most realistic hidden layer beneath ancient monuments is often this: procedure, agreement, the quiet machinery of daily order. A city is not only walls, a city is contracts, grain measures, temple offerings, work schedules. A city is the promise that your neighbor's promise will hold. A city is the repetition of tasks that keep water moving, food stored, disputes settled. And seals were small tools that helped keep those promises visible. So what if the Anunnaki city beneath Egypt is not a single place but a metaphor for the earliest layer of organized order, an idea that authority comes from a higher principle and that the world can be stabilized by repeatable steps? In that reading, built on top of becomes gentle and true. Egypt, like other civilizations, built on top of earlier human inventions, lists, measures, decrees, ritual speech, the belief that words can place things into alignment. None of this erases Egypt's uniqueness. It simply shows how humans share quiet tools across time, the way we share lullabies across families. The curator folds a small paper label and writes a few words in neat handwriting. Seal impression, river motif, star above. The label is placed beside the clay. Labels are another form of kindness. They are a way of saying, this belongs here, it is held, it is not lost. And perhaps you can offer yourself a label tonight too, a gentle one, tired but safe, thinking but settling, here in this moment. The lamp hums. The museum feels like a shell around us, insulating the mind from sharpness. The curator returns the cylinder seal to its tray, but leaves the clay imprint on the desk, as if the pattern should remain visible a little longer, long enough to sink in. Somewhere long ago, in a small room near a river, a similar seal would have been rolled to close a jar or validate a tablet. Later, along the Nile, another hand might have pressed another mark into another surface. Different symbols, same hope. Across distance and time, the gesture repeats: confirm, protect, restore. And this is the mirror held up to you tonight. Your nervous system is also looking for trustworthiness. It is asking softly, will the night hold? Will the morning arrive? Can I let go? The answer can be small. It can be the next breath, in, out. If your mind wants to replay the day, you can let it float like a leaf on water. The river carries it. The leaf turns. It moves on. The imprint on the clay remains on the desk like a tiny landscape, a river line, a star, a calm procession. The pattern is not demanding, it simply exists, steady as a lighthouse. And here is a question you can hold without effort, the way you might hold a warm mug in both hands. If the oldest worlds trusted patterns to soothe them, what gentle pattern will you choose tonight? Maybe it is the pattern of breathing. Maybe it is the pattern of listening. Maybe it is the pattern of letting the day fade in layers. The curator dims the lamp slightly, just a small adjustment, so the light becomes softer, more amber, less insistent. The clay imprint is still visible, but now it feels like something you could dream about rather than analyze. Our mystery, Egypt, built on top of an Anunnaki city, rests beside the imprint like a folded cloth. It does not need to be unfolded now. It can remain neatly placed, safe in the drawer of the mind. In the next part, we will follow the star that appeared on the seal, not into sensational skies, but into the slow astronomy of ancient people, how they watched, named, and aligned themselves with the night. We will see how calendars and constellations become another kind of city beneath, a hidden framework that makes time feel safe. Sometimes, the simplest pattern is the sound of your own room, the faint hum of a fan, the soft settling of walls, the distant hush of night outside. Let those sounds become your private museum, an archive of safety. You don't have to interpret them, just notice and let them pass, the way the curator lets the light pass over clay, revealing, then fading until your thoughts grow quieter, too. For now, let the seal's pattern repeat only as a feeling. Steady, steady, steady. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a soft lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. Breathe in gently and out slowly, and let the lighthouse of repetition fade into a comfortable fog. The lamp in the museum has been dimmed, and the clay imprint on the desk now looks like a tiny night landscape, ridges and shadows, a river line, and a star that seems to glow without brightness. When you look at it for long enough, the mind stops trying to solve it. The mind simply rests beside it, the way you might rest beside a window on a quiet train. Outside, the real night is still there. And somewhere above the museum roof, above your roof, above every streetlight and screen, the oldest pattern continues, the sky. Not a sky of fireworks, not a sky of spectacle, just a steady canopy that holds its shape while human days change. Ancient people return to it again and again because it was reliable. When rivers rose and retreated, when borders shifted, when dynasties ended, the stars still appeared night after night, like familiar faces that never hurried. If you'd like, let your eyes soften, even if they're already closed, and imagine that sky. Imagine it as a wide, dark fabric stretched gently over the world, stitched with small, quiet points of light. Not demanding, not loud, only present, in and out. We leave the museum again, but this time we don't go towards sand or river. We go upward in the gentle way dreams do. We climb to a flat roof, the kind many ancient buildings had, a steady platform cooled by night air, where a person could sit and watch without being interrupted. The roof is made of packed earth or stone. It holds the day's heat for a while, then releases it slowly like a long sigh. When you sit down, the surface feels cool against the body. A light wind touches your face, carrying the faint scent of water from a river that cannot be seen in the dark. Somewhere below, a city sleeps, animals quiet in their stalls, doors latched, lamps lowered until only a few remain. Up here, the sky feels close. An ancient observer sits near you, not speaking, not asking you to perform. Perhaps they are a scribe, or a priest, or simply someone entrusted with keeping track of the season. They have a small board, a string, maybe a simple sighting tool. Nothing complicated. The point is not technology, the point is attention. They look up and name what they see. Naming is always a kind of shelter. When you name something, you place it inside a boundary. You give your mind a place to set it down. In Mesopotamia, the night sky became a library of signs. People watched and recorded. They noticed when a bright planet lingered near a certain star, when the moon rose with a certain color, when a constellation arrived earlier or later than expected. To us, it can sound like superstition. But beneath it was a calmer impulse to make the heavens legible, to feel that time has a structure. In Egypt, the sky was also a structure, but often expressed as a steady rhythm of rising and setting, stars that appeared in sequence through the night, like a slow procession. The night itself could be divided into parts by those stars, a gentle clock made from light that never buzzed, never flashed, never demanded you reply. Think of how soothing that is. A star rises, another follows, then another. The hours move like waves, and because the pattern repeats, the human body learns to trust it. The observer beside you points toward the eastern horizon. A familiar star is lifting itself above the edge of the world. It is not rushing, it is not showing off. It simply appears the way breath appears when you stop forcing it. You might sense the quiet philosophy beneath this attention. If the sky is ordered, perhaps the earth can be ordered too. If the stars keep their stations, perhaps people can keep their promises. If the night has a rhythm, perhaps fear does not need to be endless. And here, again, our phrase returns in a new, gentle form, built on top of. What if Egypt was built on top of an older, invisible city, the city of the sky's order? What if temples and pyramids were in part ways of mirroring that order on earth, aligning stone with north, aligning corridors with rising stars, aligning festivals with the return of certain lights? This is not a claim that demands belief. It is an image that invites calm, a civilization building its structures the way a person arranges their room before sleep, so that the body feels safe inside predictable lines. In the riverlands of Mesopotamia, some stories imagine divine councils assigning destinies. In that mood, the Anunnaki belong to an atmosphere of decree, cosmic administrators who place things. When you see the sky as a grid of recurring patterns, the idea of decrees becomes less frightening and more comforting. Someone, somewhere, is keeping the schedule of the universe. In Egypt, the same comfort can arrive without councils, simply through balance. The sun returns, the stars return, the river returns. Mart is not only ethics, it is the confidence that the world is meant to stay aligned. The observer beside you makes a mark on the board, a small line, a dot, a note. The sound of it is barely audible, like a pencil in a quiet room. It reminds you of the museum desk and the label beside the clay imprint. Across centuries, the gesture repeats: notice, record, preserve. The wind cools the roof a little more. You pull an imagined cloak around your shoulders. The fabric is coarse but warm, smelling faintly of smoke and clean dust. Below, a dog turns in its sleep and sighs. Somewhere, water moves in a canal, a soft, continuous hush. You look up again. The stars do not explain themselves. They do not argue. They do not rush to convince you. They simply keep their pattern, and in doing so, they offer a kind of permission. You do not have to solve everything tonight. You only have to rest inside what is steady. If you've carried anxiety today, you might feel it as a tightness in the chest or a buzzing behind the eyes. Let the sky be a balm for that. Let it widen your internal space. Let it remind your body that you belong to something larger than the day's small urgencies. In and out. In ancient times, calendars were not only for work. They were for reassurance. They told people when the river would likely rise, when seeds should be placed, when certain rituals would return, when the year would turn toward heat or coolness. A calendar is a promise that time is not a trap. It is a circle. And circles are comforting. In Egypt, some nights were measured by a sequence of watching stars, a line of lights that rose one after another, each one taking its turn like a quiet guardian at the gate. You can simply imagine the feeling: a star rises and the watcher whispers, "This hour has come." Then another star rises and the watcher whispers again, "Now, this hour." No bells, no alarms, only the soft confirmation that time is moving, calmly. In Mesopotamia, the sky was also arranged into familiar groupings, not to trap the mind in prediction, but to give it a map. Some lists divided the heavens into regions, placing certain bright stars as anchors, like posts along a riverbank. When the observer could find those anchors, they felt less lost in the dark. The world above became a city of streets made from invisible lines, paths the eyes could walk without stumbling. And perhaps that is why the star on the seal impression feels so gentle. It is not a secret, it is a waypoint. It is the smallest reminder that even vastness can be navigated if you take it one calm step at a time. If your mind feels wide and restless tonight, try borrowing the watcher's practice. Choose one anchor in your awareness, your breath, the weight of your blanket, the sound of a fan, and let it be your fixed star. Each time a thought rises, you can simply notice it and let it pass, returning to that anchor again and again and again. Repetition, once more, becomes the lullaby. The observer traces an arc in the air as if drawing the path of a star. Then they lower their hand, satisfied, not excited. Satisfied in the quiet way that comes from recognizing a familiar rhythm. You can borrow that satisfaction tonight. You can let yourself feel, yes, the night is here, and yes, it will pass, and yes, the morning will arrive in its own time. You do not have to chase it. Now, very gently, we return to the museum again, not by climbing down, but by letting the roof dissolve into the dim room, the way dreams change scenes without effort. The clay imprint is still on the desk. The star on the seal impression looks smaller now, not because it is less important, but because you have seen the larger star field it belongs to. The curator's hands slide the clay sheet into a protective folder. The pattern disappears from sight, but the feeling remains. Order can be repeated, time can be traced, mystery can be held without strain. Before the drawer closes for the night, the curator pauses and looks up, just once, toward the ceiling, as if remembering the roof, the wind, the steady stars. And here is a gentle question to leave beside your pillow, light as dust. If the sky can keep its pattern without effort, what small pattern can you allow tonight? Breath, stillness, or the simple act of listening? No need to answer. Just let the question sit, calm and unclaimed, like the star on the clay. In, out. In the next part, we will bring this sky order back down to earth in one more soft way, through the idea of alignment, how ancient builders laid stone and story along invisible lines, and how you, too, can align your night with a gentler rhythm until sleep arrives like a boat finding its quiet dock. The sky we watched from the rooftop does not vanish when we come back down to earth. It follows us quietly, the way a rhythm follows a song even after the last note. In the museum, the ceiling hides the stars, but the idea of the stars remains. An invisible grid of steadiness, a calm architecture above everything living. Tonight, that architecture becomes our next gentle bridge. Alignment, not the kind of alignment that demands perfection, not the kind that makes you sit up straighter and try harder. A softer alignment, like the way a pillow finds your cheek, like the way the body naturally settles when the mind stops fighting the dark. Imagine the Nile again, but not at noon. At the hour just before sunrise, when the river is a long slate ribbon and the air is cool enough to feel clean inside your lungs. The horizon is pale. Birds are still quiet. The world is holding its breath. Along the bank, a group of builders and surveyors walk slowly, carrying cords, stakes, and simple tools. Their work is careful, not rushed. They pause to look at a landmark, then at the sky. They stretch a cord, pull it taut, and mark a line. Another cord crosses it, forming a right angle. A plumb line hangs still, like a tiny pendulum that has already decided to be calm. In ancient Egypt, the act of making a straight line was not only practical, it was symbolic. A straight line meant order. A measured angle meant stability. The repetition of correct forms meant the world could be trusted to hold. Now imagine that same spirit in Mesopotamia, where the ground is softer and the river's mood changes quickly. There, alignment is not always stone on stone. Sometimes it is canal on canal, field boundary on field boundary, city wall rebuilt where the older wall once stood. It is still the same desire to place life within lines that feel reliable. Built on top of. This phrase now feels like something you can see with your eyes. A new platform laid over an older foundation. A temple rebuilt on the footprint of the earlier temple. A corridor recut along the same direction because the direction itself has become sacred. There is a gentle wonder in realizing how often ancient people looked upward before they built. Not because they wanted to escape the earth, but because the sky offered a reference that did not wobble with politics or weather. When the stars returned to their familiar places, the builder could feel less alone with the responsibility of a line. The line could be shared with something older than any single lifetime. Picture a quiet night scene long before the first stone is lifted. Two observers stand on a flat ground with a small lamp shielded from wind. They do not speak much, they wait. A pair of bright stars appears, and the observers make a careful note, then stretch a cord toward that point in the darkness. The cord becomes an invisible bridge from sky to ground. The next morning, that bridge will become a wall, a doorway, a courtyard, where feet will later pass in slow rituals. In the desert, stone holds these decisions like a memory that refuses to blur. In the riverlands, clay and silt blur them, but people return and redraw again and again. Either way, the world is kept livable by repeating alignments. The museum's lamp is low. The clay imprint with the star is tucked away, but you can still feel it. A tiny star, a tiny line, a repeated pattern, the same language of alignment, only smaller. If your mind is still awake, here is a quiet practice you can borrow from the builders. Choose one line. Not a line on the ground, but a line in your body. The line of your spine resting into the mattress. The line of your breath moving in and out. The line of your attention returning gently to the same safe point, in and out. We don't have to force the breath to be deep. We only have to let it be steady. Because steadiness is what alignment feels like on the inside. Imagine a temple being raised, not in a montage of noise, but in slow, patient scenes. Morning. A stone is placed. The sound is dull, heavy, final in a soothing way. A worker brushes dust from the edge and checks the line. No one cheers, they simply nod, satisfied. Midday, a cord is tightened, a corner is checked. A wall rises another course, the blocks fitting like quiet thoughts, settling into sequence. Evening. The tools are set down. Hands are washed. A lamp is lit. A scribe records what was done, not for glory, but for continuity. Night. The stars return. The builders look up once, then sleep, trusting the morning to arrive. This is the rhythm of civilization at its most human. Work, measure, rest, repeat. Not dramatic, reliable. And this is where alignment becomes more than architecture. It becomes psychology, because when your life feels scattered, the nervous system searches for a straight line to follow. A consistent bedtime, a familiar sound, a story told in the same calm cadence, a room dimmed in the same gentle way. Maybe tonight your own alignment is as simple as turning your phone face down, as simple as letting a lamp glow instead of a bright screen, as simple as loosening your hands one finger at a time, as though you are setting down invisible tools. In some quiet houses long ago and now, people prepared for sleep the way a builder prepares a foundation. They removed obstacles, lowered light, checked the latch, listened for steady night sounds. The body recognizes these signals and begins to soften because it knows what comes next. If you want, you can take that signal right now, one slow inhale, as if you're smoothing a surface, one long exhale, as if you're laying down a final stone and stepping back. And the Anunnaki question becomes almost tender. What if the city beneath is not a buried metropolis, but the inherited idea that the world should be aligned? That authority should have a source above personal desire? That chaos should be followed by careful restoration? In Mesopotamian stories, a divine council assigns roles and destinies. In Egyptian traditions, balance keeps the universe steady and rightful words place things in their proper position. Different images, same comfort. There is a line you can follow when you feel lost. When you see it that way, built on top of becomes a gentle description of how cultures soothe themselves. They build monuments on top of older footprints, yes, but they also build meanings on top of older meanings. They repeat patterns because repetition is a form of safety, and safety is what tired minds crave at the edge of sleep. If you have felt lost lately, tired, overscheduled, pulled in too many directions, then alignment can be your quiet rescue. Not in the form of a new plan, but in the form of one small return. Back to the breath, back to the body, back to the simplest truth that you are here. And this moment is safe enough to rest. You might notice, as you listen, that your body already knows how to do this. When the story slows, the muscles soften. When the voice stays steady, the nervous system stops bracing. When images become gentle, the mind stops searching for threat. That is alignment too, the inner world matching the calmness of the outer scene. On the riverbank, the surveyors finish their marking and step back. The sun has not risen yet, but the light is coming. The lines on the ground are faint, but they are there. They will guide stone and labor, yes, but they will also guide meaning. A building is not only built from material, it is built from decisions repeated. Now imagine your own night as a building, not a fortress, not a monument, a small, safe room inside you. The walls are made of quiet routines, the foundation is made of breath, the roof is made of the sky's steadiness. You don't have to construct it from scratch. You are building on top of what already exists, the body's ancient ability to sleep, the mind's ancient desire for safety. If tonight's worries keep returning, you can treat them like wind-blown sand. They arrive, they shift, they settle. The lines beneath remain. In, out. The museum feels farther away now, like a set you no longer need. The riverbank becomes your main image, chords stretched in dawnlight, hands moving slowly, a world being aligned without shouting. And in that image, you can let yourself trust something simple. You do not need to be perfectly aligned to deserve rest. Even the builders adjusted their chords, even the scribes made mistakes, even the king lists had gaps. Perfection was never the point, continuity was. In the archive, alignment also happens on a smaller scale. A torn papyrus edge placed beside another torn edge, not forced, just patiently tested until the fibers seem to recognize each other. A curator's fingertip hovers, then withdraws, letting the pieces rest. That is a kind of building too, building a sentence from fragments, building a memory from what survives. If your mind feels torn into pieces tonight, you can practice the same mercy. Set one thought down, then another, and allow the gaps to stay breathable. Soon, without effort, the pieces form a calm shape you can rest beside. In the next part, we will step into that continuity more deeply by returning to the simplest human act that makes alignment possible. Telling the story again, softly, in a way that turns mystery into comfort. We will gather the clay, the stone, the papyrus, the seal, and the sky into one calm thread, so the mind can stop holding pieces and begin drifting towards sleep. For now, let the line be enough. One steady breath in, and one slow breath out, and feel how the night, at last, begins to match you. There is a moment in the night, maybe you felt it, when the mind stops bargaining with sleep and begins to lean toward it, quietly. The body grows heavier, not as a burden, but as a comfort. The muscles soften as if they are remembering an older instruction. When the world is dark and steady, you are allowed to let go. Tonight we have been walking a gentle loop through places that keep time in different ways. A museum drawer that breathes, a clay prism that carries a river's patience, a stone fragment that learned to speak, papyrus that remembers in pieces, a flood tablet that chooses procedure over panic, a desert that turns light into quiet, a list that becomes a lighthouse, a seal that rolls a repeating pattern, and a sky that feels like an invisible city. Now, in this 11th part of our journey, we do something simple and soothing. We gather the pieces, not to solve them, not to force them into a single conclusion, only to lay them side by side, the way a curator lays artifacts on a felt-lined table, letting each one rest, safe and unhurried. Imagine the museum desk again, under the softened lamp. The clay prism lies on a tray, its wedge marks like tiny footprints along a dried riverbank. It tells of kingship descending and settling, of order moving from city to city, as if authority were a mantle passed hand to hand, not a trophy snatched in noise. It carries the calm idea of transfer. What exists is often inherited, and inheritance can be gentle. Beside it lies the flat flood tablet, darker clay, tighter lines. Its story draws a seam through time, before and after, yet its true comfort is not the flood itself, but what follows: meetings, decrees, distribution, the slow return of a livable world. It is a record of restoration as a set of steps. Nearby, the papyrus fragments rest under clear protection, edges torn, ink faded into warm brown. They remind us that memory can break and still be held, that meaning can survive in pieces, that hands across generations will place fragments together with patience, not forcing what cannot be forced. And then the stone fragment, hard, cool, durable, rests like a small cliff in the lamp's circle. It carries the mood of Egypt, order as alignment, creation as speech, words as foundations. It is not loud, it does not need to prove. It simply endures, and endurance itself is a kind of argument for calm. The cylinder seal sits in its tray, small and almost playful, but it once carried weight. Rolled across clay, it makes a pattern return, again, confirming that agreements can be visible, that order can be repeated, that repetition can be a lullaby. And above all of it, above clay, stone, papyrus, and ink, the sky persists quiet and patterned, offering reference points that do not wobble. A map of steadiness, a city made of light. When we place these artifacts together in the same quiet space, our question changes once more into something softer than a headline. What if ancient Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? In the calm of this room, built on top of becomes less about hidden streets under sand and more about layers of human reassurance. Floors over floors, stories over stories, procedures over fear, alignments over chaos, words over silence, and silence over noise. And the name Anunnaki, in this gentler light, begins to feel less like a sharp claim and more like a symbol for something ancient and familiar. The yearning for a world that is governed by principles, by decrees, by an order that does not depend on one exhausted person's effort. If you are listening tonight with a mind that has been carrying too much, you might feel relief in that. The world does not have to be held up by your own hands alone. Even in the oldest myths, authority comes from elsewhere, descends, settles, transfers, restores. The individual participates, but does not bear the whole sky. In this room, even the smallest sensations feel like part of the story. The air is a little cooler near the cabinets and slightly warmer near the lamp. The scent of old wood lingers in the drawer runners, mixed with a chalky dryness that clay seems to leave behind. If you listen closely, you might notice the building's quiet rhythm, a distant vent breathing steadily, a soft tick from a thermostat, the polite settling of beams that have held their own long days. And here, another gentle question can rise, one that doesn't require an answer, only a feeling. Why do the oldest things often tell stories not through noise, but through controlled silence? Perhaps because silence gives the nervous system permission to stop guarding itself. Noise can feel like a demand. Safe silence feels like someone lowering the volume of the world. In museums, silence is not emptiness, it is care. It says, nothing will jump at you here, nothing will rush you, nothing will require you to decide. If your life has been full of decisions lately, emails, bills, messages, schedules, this kind of silence can feel like medicine. You can set the decision-making down for a while. You can let curiosity remain soft like a candle with a low flame. So for a few breaths, simply match the museum's pace. In, as if cool air is smoothing the inside of your chest. Out, as if your shoulders are loosening. In, as if you are turning a small artifact under a lamp. Out, as if you are placing it back into its tray, safe and contained. And with each breath, the thread of the story holds you, never enough to pull. Now let's take that feeling and turn it into a slow, cinematic retelling, one that can carry you closer to sleep. Picture a night long ago in a riverland where reeds sway and the air smells of wet soil and smoke. A scribe sits by a lamp, pressing a reed stylus into soft clay. Press, lift, press, lift. The motion is steady enough to quiet the heart. The scribe records a list, names, places like stepping stones across a dark river. Outside, water moves in the canals, a hush that never stops. Somewhere beyond the city walls, the river rises, it spills into fields. It draws a pale line across time. People move to higher ground, the sky is grey, the world feels uncertain. But then, slowly, the water withdraws, and the first thing that returns is not triumph, but procedure. A meeting, a promise, a distribution of tasks, a restoring of boundaries. a new floor laid over the old. The list begins again. From that riverland, the story drifts westward in a way that feels like breath. Clay becomes stone. Wet air becomes dry. The horizon brightens even at night because deserts reflect moonlight with a quiet generosity. Along the Nile, another scribe sits. This one dips a reed pen into ink. Stroke, pause, stroke, pause. The papyrus accepts the marks like a patient's skin. A list forms again. Kings, years, sequences, because sequence is comfort. The river will rise and retreat as it always has. After the retreat, the borders will need measuring again. Lines will be redrawn. Life will resume in steps. In the desert, surveyors stretch cords at dawn. They look up at stars, then down at ground. They make a straight line, and the straight line becomes a wall, and the wall becomes a room where someone will later rest in shade. The builders do not shout, they repeat, they align, they trust the pattern. And at night, on a flat roof, an observer watches the sky. A star rises, another follows, the hours pass quietly, without alarms. The observer's notes are small, dots, lines, yet they hold an immense kindness, a promise that time is structured, that the world is not only accident. In a small room near the river, a cylinder seal is rolled across clay to confirm a simple agreement. The pattern repeats and repetition soothes. The document is not a thrill, it is a reassurance. This jar belongs here, this grain is measured, this promise holds. When you see the story this way, the Anunnaki city begins to resemble a hidden framework rather than a hidden place. It is the invisible city of procedures, decrees, and alignments that many cultures built upon, each in their own language, each in their own materials, yet all seeking the same quiet relief, stability. And perhaps that is the most tender discovery of the night. Not that there is a secret beneath Egypt, but that there is a shared human instinct beneath us all to place calm patterns over fear, layer by layer, until the body can sleep. If tonight's story has carried you closer to rest, you can let it do what museums do best. You can put the artifacts back. You do not need to hold every detail. You do not need to keep every name. You can return the prism to its tray, return the tablet to its drawer, slide the papyrus back into its folder, set the seal down, unrolled, dim the lamp, close the cabinet with a gentle click. And in your own mind, you can do the same. Take a slow breath in as if you are placing something carefully down. And let it out as if you were closing a drawer with a controlled hush. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a soft lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. In the final part of our journey, we will walk one last time through the quiet museum room and then out into the open night. We will let the question rest where it belongs, beside the river, under the stars, inside the calm of layered time, and we will leave you with a gentle reflection, like a warm stone placed near the heart. For now, let the thread hold without pulling. Let the pattern repeat without insisting. Let the night do what it has always known how to do, in and out, and drifting. The museum is quieter now than it was at the beginning, not because anything changed in the building, but because you changed inside it. The same cool air remains. The same softened lamp glow rests on the desk. Yet the room feels gentler, as if your breathing has taught it a slower rhythm. The curator stands in front of the cabinet for a moment, hands still, as though listening to the silence before touching it. In places where time is stored, even small movements feel meaningful. The cabinet door closes with a quiet click. The drawer slides in with that familiar hush, controlled, careful, almost tender. The artifacts are back where they belong. The clay prism with its wedge marks like dried river footprints, the flood tablet holding a seam in time and the steps of restoration, the papyrus fragments, broken yet preserved by patient hands. The stone fragment, speaking softly of creation through speech, of order placed by naming, the cylinder seal, small but sure, carrying repetition like a lullaby, and above them all, the invisible city of the sky, steady and unbothered. The curator turns off the lamp. Darkness arrives, not as emptiness but as relief. And now we leave the museum, not with a rush of footsteps, but with the slow grace of someone exiting a sanctuary. The corridor is dim. The door opens to night air. The city sounds are distant and softened, as if they have agreed not to follow you too closely. Outside, the sky is there, quiet, patient, wide. If you like, imagine the star from the seal impression floating above you again. Not bright, not dramatic, just a steady point of light. It feels like the smallest promise. Even when everything else shifts, something holds. We take one last slow walk along a riverbank that could be the Nile or the Euphrates, because tonight, the exact geography matters less than the feeling. The water is dark and smooth, reeds move gently. A faint breeze carries the clean scent of night and damp soil. Somewhere, an insect sings with the same small note again and again, and repetition becomes comfort without trying. Built on top of. The phrase returns one final time, not as a mystery to solve, but as a truth to rest inside. Civilizations built on top of older flaws, they built on top of inherited stories, they built on top of procedures that made chaos livable, they built on top of the sky's steady pattern. And you, too, have been building on top of something tonight. You built calm on top of a busy day. You built softness on top of tension. You built quiet on top of noise. You built rest on top of whatever you carried here. Maybe that is the most human connection between you and the ancient world. Not secret tunnels or hidden cities, but the simple, repeated courage of restoration. A flood line appears, and life returns. A papyrus breaks, and hands gather the pieces. A season changes, and the calendar holds steady. The desert cools, and stone keeps its shape. The night arrives, and the body remembers sleep. So what do we do with the question that began our journey? What if ancient Egypt was built on top of an Anunnaki city? Tonight, we do the gentlest thing possible. We set the question down. We place it beside the river like a small clay token, not to be opened now, not to be argued over, simply to be held by the night. The question can remain beautiful without being answered. It can remain soft without becoming sharp. It can remain a lantern rather than a flashlight. Because the goal of tonight was never to prove. It was to soothe. And now we let the soothing settle into a final reflection, one that you can keep like a warm stone in the pocket of your mind. The oldest things often do not shout their stories. They offer them through controlled silence, through layers, through the patient way they survive. They teach us that time is not only loss, time is also preservation. A civilization can fall and yet a small tablet can remain. A memory can break and yet fragments can still be placed together. A day can be overwhelming and yet night can still arrive with quiet permission. Perhaps the most ancient city beneath all our civilizations is not buried in sand at all. Perhaps it is the habit of building peace layer by layer. One calm breath, one small routine, one gentle thought placed where it belongs. One quiet agreement with yourself. I can rest now. Why do the oldest things often tell stories not through noise but through controlled silence? Maybe because silence does not demand. Silence allows. Silence holds. And that is what we are doing here, holding you gently in a quiet corner of the night. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory, feel free to share it below. If this story brought you calm, leave a gentle comment for yourself. Don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a soft lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. Now, you don't have to follow every sentence. You don't have to keep your attention sharp. You can let words become distant, like a boat drifting away from the shore. Just breathe. In, slow and easy. Out, long and soft. Imagine the museum drawer closing again. Hush. Imagine the river smoothing its surface. Hush. Imagine the desert cooling under the stars. Hush. And in that hush, let your thoughts become fewer, like lights going out one by one in a quiet town. If there is anything you still feel you must carry, you can place it on the river for the night. Let it float. Let it drift. The river knows how to carry weight without complaint. And you can let your body sink into the place where it is supported. The story has done its work. The lantern can dim. The night can take you the rest of the way.
Our story pauses here. Every visual and word you've experienced was assisted by AI, yet guided and perfected by sincere human emotion. We hope this harmony of history and technology has crafted a beautiful dream for you tonight. Let go and drift deep into sleep. Good night.